We have got major challenges in terms of healthcare service provision, particularly at the primary healthcare level in regional South Australia. They're problems that have been growing for a long time, and frankly, I'm not too sure enough has been doing to solve them in the short term, because workforce is the big challenge. And that's where we've got a special national cabinet happening later in the year that I advocated for, that's solely focused on healthcare with a particular focus on workforce.
And workforce is an amazing one. Since I landed on the Eyre Peninsula, I've been asking business people and people in general what they think the biggest challenge is facing the EP at the moment, and it is staff shortages, just trying to get people. It must be, as a government, a very challenging problem to solve, because wherever I travel around South Australia, if I say to a business owner, what's giving you grief at the moment? What's your biggest challenge? It's that number one by a mile. Like, how do you, as a government, begin to rectify that, or what can you do?
Yeah, so you're right. The single biggest constraint to growth in the state at the moment is access to people. Now, to be frank, in some respects, that's a good problem to have. It's not a good problem, but if you ask me, Peter, you've got a choice between having people out of work trying to find a job, or people who are trying to find people to do a job. I'd probably take the latter problem. Look in the eyes of people who can't find work who want it. That's the most frustrating thing from my perspective as a Labor leader. That said, you worry about unmet potential. You worry about opportunity not being realised because of a shortage of labour. Now, skilled migration is part of that equation. Better skilling our existing employees is part of that equation. But also improving labour participation is part of that equation. Our labour participation rate in South Australia, that is the percentage of the working age population who participate in the workforce, is up on historic levels. In fact, at some of the highest levels it's ever been, but we're still below the rest of the country. There is a proportion of South Australians who are structurally unemployed. If you wake up this morning and you want a job, you've got one, right? Doesn't matter where you are. If you want a job bad enough in the state at the moment, you're going to find one. But there's a cohort of people who are completely disengaged from the labour market for a whole range of reasons that we've got to find ways, at least ways to get to the younger people so they don't end up in the same circumstance, to unlock that intergenerational welfare dependency in a way that is not an easy thing to do, but is worthy of being a policy focus.